The rain had been falling for hours when my best friend looked at me with tired eyes and said sharing a bed was no big deal. I laughed because I thought she was joking. We had survived years of friendship, impossible exams, broken hearts, family troubles, and countless sleepless nights, so one bed in a tiny cabin during a weekend trip hardly seemed important. But when the lights went out and silence settled between us, she gently reached for my trembling hand and placed it on her waist. In that single moment, my heart began racing for reasons I could no longer explain, and I realized that sometimes the strongest storms are not the ones outside the window but the ones hidden deep inside us. Before we continue this emotional journey, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from, share this story with someone who believes in second chances, and subscribe to Ripple of Kindness, where every story reminds us that hope often arrives when we least expect it. For most of my life, I believed that friendship was simple. My best friend Emily had been part of every important memory I owned. We met in middle school after I accidentally spilled coffee over her notebook on the first day of class. Instead of getting angry, she laughed until both of us were crying with laughter. That single accident became the beginning of a friendship that survived every challenge life placed in front of us. We celebrated birthdays together, stayed awake helping each other study, comforted each other after painful breakups, and promised that no matter where life carried us, we would never become strangers. She knew the fears I never shared with anyone else, and I knew the invisible sadness she always tried to hide behind her bright smile. Years later, life became more difficult than either of us expected. My father lost his job, forcing me to work long hours while finishing college. Emily's mother became seriously ill, and hospital visits replaced family vacations. We rarely complained because we thought staying strong meant pretending everything was fine. Yet beneath every smile lived exhaustion that neither of us wanted to admit. When Emily suggested we spend one weekend away in her late grandfather's old cabin beside a quiet lake, it felt less like a vacation and more like an opportunity to breathe again before life swallowed us completely. The cabin was old, peaceful, and wonderfully isolated. Pine trees surrounded the small wooden house, and the lake reflected the evening sky like polished glass. Inside, however, there was only one small bedroom with a single bed. We laughed about it immediately. After all, we had shared hotel rooms before, slept on buses during school trips, and even spent nights studying together on the same couch. Neither of us imagined that such an ordinary detail would become the turning point of our lives. That evening we cooked a simple dinner, watched the rain begin falling against the windows, and spoke honestly for the first time in months. Without distractions or busy schedules, every hidden emotion found its way into the conversation. Emily admitted she was terrified of losing her mother. I confessed that I constantly feared disappointing my struggling family because I could never seem to earn enough money or accomplish enough. We sat quietly after our words faded, listening only to the rain. For once, neither of us tried to fix the other's problems. We simply allowed the silence to remind us that no one has to carry pain alone. When bedtime arrived, the tiny room felt unusually quiet. We climbed into bed, laughing awkwardly as we tried to stay on opposite sides. Then Emily smiled gently, took my hand, and rested it lightly against her waist. There was nothing dramatic or inappropriate in her gesture. It was simply the silent request of someone who had carried unbearable fear for far too long and needed to feel that another human being was still there. I realized then that real comfort is often misunderstood. Sometimes people do not need perfect advice. Sometimes they simply need to know they are not facing the darkness by themselves. Neither of us slept much that night. Instead, we listened to the storm outside while speaking softly about dreams we had almost forgotten. Emily confessed she wanted to become a children's therapist because she never wanted another frightened child to feel as lonely as she once had. I admitted I secretly wanted to become a writer, even though I had convinced myself that dream was unrealistic. We encouraged each other the way only lifelong friends can, reminding one another of forgotten strengths buried beneath years of disappointment. The following morning, sunlight replaced the storm. The lake sparkled, birds returned to the trees, and everything looked strangely different, although nothing had actually changed. During breakfast, Emily received a phone call from the hospital. Her mother's condition had become worse overnight. Within minutes, we packed our bags and rushed back to the city. The peaceful weekend ended far sooner than expected, but something inside both of us had quietly changed forever. The next several weeks became some of the hardest either of us had ever experienced. Emily spent nearly every day at the hospital while I balanced work, school, and helping her however I could. Some evenings I simply sat beside her without speaking because I remembered what that night in the cabin had taught me. Presence often heals more deeply than words. There were moments when both of us wanted to give up under the weight of constant uncertainty, yet our friendship became the quiet foundation that kept us standing. Eventually, Emily's mother began recovering, slowly but steadily. Doctors called it remarkable progress. Watching her smile again reminded me that hope rarely arrives all at once. It appears in tiny moments, a stronger heartbeat, a deeper breath, a small laugh after weeks of tears. Around the same time, I gathered enough courage to submit one of my short stories to a local writing competition. I almost deleted the email before sending it, convinced that I would fail. Emily refused to let me quit before trying. Months later, that story unexpectedly won first place, opening doors I had never believed possible. Looking back, people often ask when our lives truly began changing. They expect me to mention winning the competition or Emily's mother's recovery. But the truth is much simpler. Everything changed on that rainy night inside the tiny cabin when my best friend quietly reached for my hand and reminded me that strength is not about pretending to be fearless. Strength is allowing someone to stand beside you while you carry your burdens. If this story has touched your heart so far, please don't keep your feelings to yourself. Like this video, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to Ripple of Kindness so together we can spread stories that remind the world compassion still exists. Before the ending, tell us in the comments, have you ever had a friend whose silent support changed your life forever? We'd love to read your story. Today Emily works with children recovering from trauma, helping them believe in brighter tomorrows, while I continue writing stories that celebrate ordinary people doing extraordinary acts of kindness. We still laugh about that tiny cabin and the old bed that seemed far too small. Yet whenever I remember that rainy night, I never think about awkwardness or confusion. I remember trust. I remember compassion. I remember two exhausted friends discovering that healing sometimes begins with nothing more than a gentle hand resting where a frightened heart can finally feel safe. Life still brings storms, disappointments, and impossible days, but whenever those moments arrive, I remember that even the darkest night eventually welcomes the morning. And perhaps the greatest gift we can ever offer another person is not perfect advice or endless solutions, but the quiet promise that no matter how heavy life becomes, they will never have to face it alone.